Hi, everyone. My name is Teresa Marcus. I'm president of the AFP Ottawa chapter, and just want to thank you all for joining. This is our last spring series of the learning webinars offered by AFP Ottawa. And I was saying earlier that we've just been so heartened by the response of so many folks who just jumped on to just really participating in the learning environment that we were able to kind of bring together in light of COVID-19. So thank you for continuing to stay with us, and we look forward to kind of developing new content for you in the year to come. And today is all about content. That was an unintentional kind of segue, but we're really delighted to have Mo Wajah here, communicator extraordinaire, podcast host, marketer, fundraiser with Blakely, who's going to talk to us today about building our own legends. So how do you leverage kind of content in this age of new media, new strategies? And I don't know any fundraisers or really any kind of leaders, whether it's in our sector or in other sectors, who aren't thinking about how to really kind of stand out from all the noise and how to differentiate themselves. So thank you, Mo, for being with us today. Before we turn it over to Mo, I'd like to ask Leslie Traynor to say a few words. So Leslie is here with us today from Harvey McKinnon and Associates. And I want to thank Harvey McKinnon and Associates for really being such a strong supporter of AFP Ottawa and all of our learning events over the past year, whether they've been in person or whether we've had to pivot to online. So thank you, Harvey McKinnon and Associates, and thank you for Leslie for being with us. I will also add, as a little point of housekeeping, that if folks have questions, please look down south at the Q&A section. And please feel free to ask questions in the Q&A button, and we'll be sure to make time for those at the end of the call. But as Ruby mentioned up front, if you're here, if you're on the call, please feel free to say hello and chat in the chat room. So with that, I'll turn it over to Leslie, who will then pass the mic directly over to Mo. So thanks again.
Thank you, Teresa. And speaking of legends, I'm actually not Lynn Boardman. You might see my name right now as Lynn Boardman. For those of you who may know me, I think I did recognize a few names that are on the attendee list. It's a pleasure to sponsor these sessions. Getting together, as we all know now, in virtual space is more important than ever. And congratulations on the previous sessions that you guys have already hosted. Love the Ottawa AFP. Always have great content, very relevant. And we're very happy to sponsor this session. And I hope everyone really enjoys it. I know I'm looking forward to it. So thank you.
All righty. Well, I mean, on my end, I'm happy to be here. It's a pleasure to be speaking with all of you today, talking personal branding. Before the session started, we've all been kind of passing the ball back and forth, talking about kind of the impact that the global pandemic, COVID-19, and the social impact that it has had on the world and the way in which we communicate and connect with those around us. Personal branding has always been important, but in a world in which many of the ways in which we connect with other people have fundamentally shifted, it's in some ways more important than ever, because now we need to adjust to a world where the focus has shifted, the language has shifted, the topics of focus have shifted, and the way in which we connect with people has, again, shifted. Now, in titling this talk, I chose the word legend quite intentionally, because a legend is something that people have heard of about a person, about a thing, without actually necessarily having experienced that same thing. A legend is something that we know of anecdotally, we know of from history, we know of from the shared experiences of those around us, but it's not necessarily something that we have directly experienced ourselves, which is kind of at the core of branding and what it means when you've successfully built out your brand. Because your brand at the end of the day is part of how people perceive you, how people connect with you, and how people understand who you are, what you do, and what you're capable of before they even meet you. It's the herd of you factor. Building your legend is about building a reputation. It's about building a set of values, attributes, ideas, and concepts that are connected to your name and who you are as an individual. And it's something that at the end of the day, you want to resonate with people when they hear your name, before perhaps they've even had the opportunity to meet you. But before we talk about going into how to actually build your brand, I want to talk about why we build a brand, and then also who should build a brand, essentially. Because I think branding in general has a colloquial understanding, a corporate understanding, and then there's kind of the reality of what it means to build a brand and the value that building a brand delivers. Because when we think personal branding, and this is anecdotal, but when a lot of people think about personal branding, what they think about are people standing on stage, delivering a webinar. They think of big corporate leaders, people like Steve Jobs or Bill Gates or Elon Musk or any of another number of tech giants who stand up in front of massive audiences of thousands of people. They think of people who are famous. They think of people who are Instagram influencers. All of that is centered around the idea of brand. But brand exists within everyone, and brand and building a brand delivers value for not only you as an individual, but everyone you're connected with. And in the context of this specifically, your organization. A well-built brand begins by building trust. When you haven't heard of a person, or you haven't heard of an organization, or you haven't heard of anyone who's offering something to you, there's a trust threshold that people need to overcome. There's a reason that we trust recommendations from friends and family, because that person has already vetted the service, the idea, the individual who you're being connected with. And so you are able to trust them through the recommendations of the people around you. However, if you're connecting with someone where there is no third-party connection to that person, overcoming the trust barrier plays a factor. Having built an intentional brand, and we'll talk a lot about intentional branding throughout this process, helps you overcome that barrier. It builds trust so that when a person meets you, they have an understanding of the value that you can deliver and the value that you bring to the table before you've even had the beginnings of a conversation. It also opens up opportunities. So we have two kinds of opportunities that come to us: opportunities we seek and opportunities that seek us. Now, opportunities we seek, branding plays a role, because once you connect with an opportunity through a person or an organization, your previous work connects back to how well you're able to take advantage of that opportunity. It's the your reputation precedes you concept. When it comes to opportunities seeking us, this comes down to when people have a need, or organizations have a need, and they need to find someone to fulfill that need. So when they are looking for you, whether that's online or through their network, having a brand that people know, can connect with, and have an understanding of in terms of the value that you can deliver is pretty critical, because it helps those opportunities find you. And then, of course, it forges connections. Now, this is super relevant when we're talking about larger scale in-person conversations. So Ottawa Fundraising Day, if COVID-19 hadn't happened and we were all gathered together in person, or alternatively something like Congress or Icon, or an event hosted by your not-for-profit. Your brand forges connections because it makes people want to connect with you. If you've built a brand effectively, then it's less about, or it can become less about, you looking for people within and beyond your network to make a connection with, and those connections seeking you out. Essentially, when it comes to brand building, the core value is that it turns your connection building from outbound to inbound. You're less so seeking connections, and connections and opportunities begin to seek you on the basis of the trust that they can have in the value that your brand shows that you provide. And this applies outwards to your organization as well. We'll dig a little deeper into that, but in the context of this conversation, I'm going to connect the idea of personal branding back to charitable organizations and not-for-profits fairly consistently throughout this process. Simply put, in this case, if your brand is strong and people just hearing your name can have trust in your capacity to deliver value in a certain way, then having your name associated with the organization you serve and connected on a values level immediately delivers value to your organization. Because people, at the end of the day, trust people. They don't just trust the corporate monolith or the large-scale charity, or even the smaller-scale charitable organization or nonprofit. They trust the people that they engage with, who become a representation of that organization, which is why building your brand is connected to building the brand and aiding your organization. So then the question becomes, who can actually build a brand? And as you can see, the short answer is everyone. There's one aspect of brand building that I want to address right off the bat. It'll come back in a little bit later, and I don't want to belabor the point, but I feel it should be noted right from the get-go. Branding is not connected to being extroverted. It can be if that is your approach, but branding as an activity is not something reserved for the extroverts. It's not something that's reserved, or quote unquote extroverts. It's not reserved for just the people who are hyper comfortable getting up on stage and delivering a presentation. Branding is something that can be done and can be connected intentionally to any individual, no matter who they are. However, a lot of the time, the loudest brands that we see are connected in some way or are proportionally connected to an individual who shows signs or qualities of being an extroverted person. Branding and the activities associated with branding are just as often a combination of learned behaviors and inherent behaviors as they are something that a person just does automatically because of who they are. We can learn the things that help us build a brand. And part of that is understanding what actually goes into brand building. Because there's a classic association with a few characteristics or activities that make many people feel that personal branding and the activity of personal branding isn't necessarily for them. So things like, I've already mentioned public speaking, which many people feel uncomfortable doing. Social media and maintaining an active presence on social media across Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, TikTok, depending on what you're into. The list goes on, which can in and of itself be exhausting and repetitive. Then, of course, there's the extroverted qualities of a person who's always out there speaking to people, being loud, being in your face, and generally promoting themselves over and over and over again. These are attributes and these are activities that a portion of the population finds very easy to do. For instance, I'll note that, and I'll fully flag that I myself find most of these activities, most of these attributes pretty inherent and fairly easy to do. But while a lot of the time these are the outward facing aspects of branding, they're not really at the core of what it is to build your personal brand. Building your personal brand comes down to, well, supporting others. Because at the end of the day, as you'll see at the bottom of the screen, it's all about delivering value. It's relationship building. And we're talking beyond the kind of two-dimensional, immediate wave to a person relationship. They know what your face is, you ask how the weather is, and then you move on relationship. We're looking for relationships that forge deeper connections. We're looking for relationships that make a person think of you when they need support or they need help or they run into a challenge personally or professionally that they believe that you can help with. Relationship building is about becoming top of mind within your field so that when somebody needs something, they're ready to connect with you or they think of you first. Then, of course, there's continuous learning because it's not enough just to be able to talk a good game. A lot of branding is associated with the fake it till you make it concept. And I mean, fair enough, that exists. And it's something that I think many people, including myself, have done on some level at some point. But that only takes you so far. At a certain level, you need to actually deliver content and actually deliver value. And that's where continuous learning comes into play. And then, as we'll talk about soon when we get to the 3 pillars of personal branding, a lot of this comes down to consistent daily effort. That doesn't mean posting on Instagram every day. That means making an effort to continually find new ways to learn, to build new relationships, and to support others. Because at the core of brand is delivering value. If you are a person who only does all of the things in the left-hand column, but your topics never evolve, your perspective never evolves, you're never bringing something new to the table, then you are, as they say, all talk and no action. It's the action that solidifies branding. And all of the things that make a brand truly powerful, all of the things that are integral to brand building, though not always top of mind, are really at its core the things that we need to focus on when it comes to building a brand. And all of these things in the right-hand column aren't dependent on whether, well, they aren't dependent on personality. They aren't dependent on whether you identify or are identified as extroverted or introverted. I'll leave the conversation of extroversion or introversion there because there are many more people with a lot more psychological, psychiatric experience who can speak to that topic. I'll simply say that in the context of this conversation on brand building, what we're trying to do and what we're looking for here are actions, activities, and qualities that can be learned, built up, and evolved within all of us. So, what's a brand? At its core, a brand is just public perception. Now, this isn't the Merriam-Webster dictionary definition of brand, nor is this the Urban Dictionary or another dictionary version of brand. This is a definition that I've put together based on my experience building personal brand, building corporate brand, and working in the not-for-profit sector with a variety of not-for-profit organizations where the work is associated with brand. Brand is public perception. Brand is a set of expected behaviors and expertise based on the observations, background knowledge, or previous interactions that you've had with another person. Your interactions with a person or an organization indicate or advise or evolve what you think of that organization. And what you think of that organization is brand. That's why brand is kind of ever evolving, and brand is not always consistent from one person to another or one group to another. Brand is something that organizations and individuals continue to work on, adapt, and build, because it's all about what the greatest public perception is around a person or an organization and what they do. It's not about the outliers. It's about what most people think about you in general when they hear your name, which is why everyone has a brand. I've spoken to a lot of people about the concept of branding on a professional level and a personal level, conversationally, and through sessions like this. And the interesting thing that comes up is when you get into different fields. For instance, when I've spoken at U of T at the Dalai Lama School, people who don't work in the more quote unquote business or not-for-profit section don't always connect themselves to having a brand. What the truth is, because brand is just public perception, every single person has a brand, whether you like it or not. A relative colloquialism, at least within my network, that's come up is people saying about someone else, that's on brand, or that's on brand behavior. What that means is that what they're saying is that is a behavior that we would expect of that person, or that is something we would expect that person to do, know, or interact with in some way. And we all have these expected behaviors based upon the way that we communicate with those around us, based upon our work, based upon our associations, based upon what we do and how we do it. We're connected to people in some way, and so therefore we all have a brand, whether we like it or not. The difference, of course, is whether the brand you're building is intentional or unintentional. Now, this is not to say that one way is right per se and another is wrong. Branding is such a subjective field that I don't know that there is a right or wrong answer, especially because it's so couched in the values of the individual. And some person's values preclude them from doing something like intentional brand building, which is fair enough. In this case, what we want to look at is what both of those things mean. I'll start on the right with unintentional brand building. Unintentional brand building is about essentially living your life, and how people perceive you is how people perceive you. It's undirected. On the left-hand column, intentional branding involves a few steps, a few more steps than I've listed here, and we'll go into those in detail soon. But intentional branding starts by actually self-assessing, taking a regular account of how you're perceived by those around you, and essentially looking for challenges, looking for areas of change, because we all have a sense of how we're perceived by the people around us. And that is or is not always accurate, depending on kind of our self-assessment. We all write ourselves as the hero of our own story. And as we've seen in countless narratives and countless stories, the hero is sometimes blind to the challenges that they create. And so taking a regular account of how you're perceived helps you identify those challenges as they arise. You're then active in actually facilitating change. It's not enough to know that an interaction that you're having is challenging or creating challenges for yourself. It's actually taking that next step to facilitate change by taking intentional action that makes you someone who intentionally brands. And then, of course, introspection plays a massive role in this, because it's not just about assessing your outward interactions and changing the interaction. It's about introspectively identifying why an action is taking place, what leads you to a certain behavior, connection, interaction, and why and how you can change that behavior. And this is why I identified relationship building and forging connections as so important to the process of brand building. Because at the end of the day, your brand as an individual is built up of the aggregate of your interactions with other people. Those interactions might be digital on social media. Those interactions might be through a screen on a webinar. They might be on a stage once we're allowed to do that again. Or they might be one-on-one in person. But all of these things build up your public perception. They build up your brand. So introspection plays a role because it's all about relationship building and building a connection. Now, when it comes to unintentional branding, like I said, everything on the left might actually happen. You might take an account every now and then of how you're perceived. You might now and then facilitate change, and you might be introspective. All of these don't preclude the other. However, it's about putting all of these pieces together and actively and intentionally looking for opportunities to improve that move you from a person who is living their life unintentionally branding simply through the regular daily connections that they make with those around them in person, digitally, or over social media, and somebody who is actively working to mold and adjust themselves to improve their relationships with others. Again, this isn't about faking it. This isn't about faking a personality, a perspective, a way of being. It's about understanding that all of our relationships with everyone around us can be improved in some way. And by improving that relationship, we can deliver more value to the people around us. And so by actively participating in figuring out where your interactions become challenging, you're becoming an intentional and active participant in figuring out how you can deliver more value to people. So what does it take to actually build an intentional brand? I've narrowed it down to 5 steps. 1, articulate goals. Now, this isn't new. Goal setting is everywhere, but goal setting is also everything. Because if you don't know what you're trying to achieve, taking active steps to achieve something is impossible. And these goals need to be somewhat specific. It's not just about, I generally want to have better relationships, because what are your metrics? How are you going to actually measure that, personally or professionally, right? So we need to articulate our goals with specificity. Then you need to do a self-assessment. Understand how you want to be perceived and how you want to be seen by those around you. Understand how you want to grow personally or professionally when it comes to your connections and your relationships or your work or your career. And then understand the gaps. So that's step 3, identify areas of improvement. What do you actually need to change? And then, of course, there's identifying what you need to do to change those things. And then step number 5 is just take action consistently. Do the thing over and over and over again. And honestly, that's the hardest part. Again, this isn't just about posting regularly on social. We'll talk a bit about social and its kind of validity as a tool of personal branding in today's day and age. But it's about consistency of action that will help us all grow and grow our personal brand. Today, we're going to focus mainly on step 2, 4, and 5. The reason for this is that goals are inherently subjective, and I won't presume to tell you what your goals should be, because those goals are all about you. They're personal. They're about your relationships, your career, and how you want to grow. And likewise, identifying areas of improvements are essentially tied to your goals. They're integral to your goals. So without understanding your goals, it's hard to identify areas of improvement. What I can do is work on equipping you with some tools to help you self-assess, identify change actions, and consistently take action. Starting with the self-assessment. So this is essentially kind of a summary of what brand looks like related to the individual. the way that I would frame it is that all of the attributes that make you you are bricks in the wall of your brand built on a foundation of your values. Our values, the things we find important, the things that are integral to us, are at the core of our brand. And that's whether you're doing this intentionally or whether you're branding unintentionally, living your life, right? Operating under the model of branding intentionally, self-assessing means looking through each of these kind of bricks in the wall that I've put in front of you here. This is not an exhaustive list. This is a top of mind list of things that play a role in branding. The causes you support, your education, this is becoming less and less important over time. However, the role of being a PhD is still strong, for example. So your education plays a role, or at least your visible education through what you advertise, your location. So, I mean, I'd be remiss not to acknowledge that Toronto has a brand, and being a person who lives in Toronto and is seen as a professional from Toronto, that carries something with me. Your work, where you work, who you work with, your hobbies, the things that you do are all tie into a person's perception of you, your network, the people who you surround with, your perceived lifestyle, what people see of the way you live. And a lot of that comes down to social media or the people who are in your closest circle who get to actually experience the way that you live your life. Politics, of course, plays a role, and your visible politics, what you express about politics to other people. Social media plays a massive role. And then, of course, it's all about connection. So how you interact with people. Your appearance is one that I want to touch on because it is inherently problematic. Because your appearance is something that you can only control, or only should control, to some degree or another. So your appearance is the way you dress, the clothes you wear. If I walked on stage wearing one thing versus another, what is the perception that generates from me to the people around me? But it also comes down to things you can't change, be it your ethnic background, the color of your eyes, the color of your hair, like your how you're perceived when you walk into a room, your body type. All of these aspects are things you can't change, and nor should you. I'm mentioning it purely so that we have an understanding, and because I'd be remiss not to, that how we appear affects how people perceive us. It's something to acknowledge. It's something to understand. I acknowledge that it is inherently a problematic thing that shouldn't really be true, but it also is true. So if we're doing a critical self-assessment of our brand and the role that different attributes of ourselves play in building our brand on a foundation of our values, this is one of the things that we need to take into account. Similarly, education, again, plays a role. It shouldn't necessarily, but it does. And so if we're intentionally branding ourselves as uncomfortable as some of that introspection and self-assessment may be in the context of the socio-political world that we exist in, it's still valuable to you to acknowledge that these things exist and to try to work within them, or depending on your own personal context and lived experience, around them. At the core of it, though, what we're looking at here is what makes up a person's brand. And when we're assessing ourselves, what are the things that we need to look at? So the question then becomes, how do we actually do that self-assessment? It's enough to say, it's something to say that, yes, these things exist. I support these causes. These are the people I surround myself with. This is how I've engaged people in a professional circumstance. And these are the things that I've been posting online. It's enough to acknowledge that those exist. But as I said, we're all the hero of our own story. And the hero frequently has blind spots when it comes to the way in which they communicate with other people, or the way in which their behavior, their connections are impacting those around them. And to do a critical self-assessment, we need to find a way to pull ourselves out of that first-person narrative so that we can get a bird's eye view of some of the blind spots that exist within ourselves about ourselves. This is moving a little outside of what do other people think of you, and trying to take a look at an assessment of what you would think of yourself if you are an outside party meeting yourself or reading about yourself. we all live our lives in a first person narrative. I'm doing this. My name is, I'm taking this action. I'm going to the shop. I'm eating I'm doing and that's where the blind spots exist. What we want to do is pull ourselves a little out of it and write your third person narrative. And this can be as exhaustive or not as you choose to. We're not necessarily looking for a full autobiography. What we're looking for here is an opportunity to kind of assess your status right now in the context of the people that you surround yourself with. So for myself, it might start with Mohammed Waja, better known to his friends and colleagues as Mo, is a young, ambitious fundraiser at Blakely. Within that first sentence alone, I've acknowledged a few components or a few attributes about myself that I may not think about on a regular basis, but may exist if another person is meeting me or connecting with me. Specifically, my ethnicity, the name Mohammed. I go by Mo when I'm speaking to other people, but Mohammed and the name Mohammed has connotations surrounding it, socially and politically. And those change based upon where you're operating geographically in the world and the culture of that location. The name Mohammed comes with expectations. Now, that's rightly or wrongly, but it's also true that depending on where you are, expectations exist. Another one there is ambitious. So ambition is perceived in a variety of ways. Some people perceive it as a positive attribute, some people don't. But if I self-assess that this is something that people can likely read in me, then it also informs my behavior when I'm connecting with other people in one way or another. And of course, age is a third one that comes into play there, because the role that age plays in how you're perceived is significant in both directions. So failing to acknowledge that your visible youth or otherwise is a factor in how people will interact with and connect with you gives you a blind spot. So writing your third person narrative is about finding and identifying those blind spots and then looking at how they engage the relationships around you. So when you're writing your third person narrative, what you want to do is take into account the qualities that fuel a person's perception of you, the attributes in yourself that may lead to a person to shift their perception of you, the relationships with the people around you, and where you want your story to go. An easy example for me, which I think is fairly ubiquitous, is Harry Potter. In between Harry Potter book 4 and Harry Potter book 5, Harry experienced this pretty significant trauma. And then from that point, his interactions with his friends were volatile, were angry, were in many ways problematic in and of themselves and caused a degree of harm and pain to those around him. In the context of Harry as a first person living their first person narrative, their focus on their own experience could have led to blind spots in terms of their interactions with all of the people around them. But us as the reader, getting a third person bird's eye view of their interactions can see a shift from the experiences last year in book 4 to the experiences this year in book 5, and the way that the relationships around him have changed. So when it comes to writing and actually writing your third person narrative, there are a few steps that you can take. Start with the core you. What are the qualities that you have that you most value? Take a critical assessment of all of your qualities, but start with the ones that you most value. What are the things in yourself, the things about yourself, and the way that you engage with the world around you that you find the most valuable? And then build outwards from there to get as much of an accounting of the qualities that make you you as possible. Then take that one step forward and connect it to the activities that you engage with on a regular basis. And what do those lead to in terms of who you are and how you're perceived? An example for myself is that recreationally, I box. So boxing is something, or at least I boxed before COVID-19. Now I don't box, but I was boxing recreationally before COVID-19. So in the context of that, what do people think about boxing? What is the perception of the sport? And what does that mean about a person who publicly over social media or otherwise talks about boxing as an activity? And that can apply outwards to a variety of different activities based upon whatever your hobbies happen to be. So once you have those things and you've built up kind of the Mohammed Waja is, or whoever you are, your first name, last name is this person, and you've done that self-assessment, move outwards to the environment that you exist in. Who are your close relationships, and what do those people say about you? Not what do they say themselves, but based upon your association with those individuals or with that group of individuals, what is the likely perception that people have of you as a person? And then, of course, where do you spend your time? So where are you on a regular basis, and how does that impact what people see of you? And you just want to build outward and outward from there until you've written this narrative about you, the hero of the story, in the third person, in kind of your universe, your story, the place that you exist in, and the people that you exist with. The goal in this process is to develop out the clearest and most objective narrative you can. And objective is the key point here. The clearest and most objective narrative you have, which you can use to identify areas of improvement. So it's less so about writing yourself as your favorite character in the book, and more just about writing an overall character arc for who you are. And that's where you go from there. Because once you have you in the third person, you as a character that you've taken a step back from and have an opportunity to speak about as an external party with a bird's eye view, then you can look at your narrative arc and see, where do you actually want to go from here? Where are the problem points? Are you associating with the right people? Are you connected in the right places? Are you spending your time in the right places? And then you can actively and intentionally draft a narrative arc that can take you a step forward. And once you've done that, then you actually need to identify the areas of change. You're identifying at this point what needs to be done in order to achieve that narrative arc. We've taken a step back. We understand who we are as a character within our own story, not in the first person, but in the third person. We know the narrative arc that we want to bring ourselves on to get to wherever we want to be, whatever our goals are in the future. So the question is, what do we actually have to do to change those things? So in the session description, I talked about the 3 pillars of personal branding. Now, within each of these, changing the way that we're perceived by people, there is a subjective component, because what it really comes down to is the fact that there is no one size fits all for how to build a brand that connects to every single person. Your lived experience plays a critical, intrinsic role to how you build whatever the brand is that you want to build. What I'm proposing here are 3 pillars or 3 channels that you can go down in order to achieve whatever that is. And those 3 are clarity, authority, and consistency. For the sake of simplicity, I'm going to put this in the context of a working environment. So building a professional brand rather than building your personal brand in a professional context rather than simply working to build up your relationships with the people around you. Building social relationships and social branding is a thing that exists, and it is something that we can do, and it's something that I personally have engaged in on a personal and professional level before. But it's a little more complex, especially when we're digging into kind of what makes personal branding personal branding. So for the sake of this, on an example level, I'm going to look at a career path for how you're building your personal brand through clarity, authority, and consistency. So clarity is simply about helping people understand what you're about. People build up a vision of the people around them within their mind. And so we need to help them build the vision that we want people to see. We need to clearly demonstrate the things that we care about, which I'll call areas of focus, that we want to be part of our overall brand. Then there's authority. And this is where trust building comes into play. This is about leading people to see you as a knowledgeable expert within your area of expertise. And this area is a little complex, especially because the world is fairly loud at the moment, but it's very, very important. It's where you go from all talk, no action to delivering real value. And then, of course, there's consistency. To consistently reinforce your brand over and over and over again. So let's dig in. So we talked about brand building as all about your public perception, what people think about you as an individual based upon your interactions with them. And a lot of that comes down to what you talk about, what people see about you, social media or in person. So if you want to build your brand now, looking at it from the perspective of someone who's never done brand building before, or somebody who's rebuilding their brand, who's changed career paths, who's joined a new organization, who's had some shift in their life that has led them to believe that they want to adjust the way that they're perceived by those around them. This comes down to changing or redeveloping a set of expected behaviors and expertise that come to mind when people think about you. And that can be a bit confusing, both for yourself and for the people around you. If you've spent your entire life caring about A, B, and C and talking about these three subjects, for the sake of argument, let's go with you're in the for-profit sector. So you're fully corporate big business. You're somebody who spent your time doing a lot of combat sports, for instance. I'm choosing things that are on the kind of opposite end of the spectrum of what you might see from a person fundraising. So let's focus on those things. You're somebody from the corporate sector. Your focus was primarily in combat sports. And a lot of your life was spent focusing on career first, career first, career first. And now you've reached a point in your life where you want to redevelop the way that people perceive you. You've decided to shift gears and move into the not-for-profit sector. Your athletic interest has changed somewhat. It's less so on the combat sports level. And then you have decided to re-emphasize the connection that you have with your family over the connection that you have with your career. Now, if you think about this in the context of an Instagram page or a social media page, because that's kind of the easiest way to encapsulate it and look at it. If I've spent the last 5 years or so, and all I've been posting about is, my corporate job down on Bay Street in Toronto, MMA, and the next promotion I got at my career, or that I'm crushing the late nights at the office. And now suddenly, with no warning, shift, nothing, I've shifted to somebody who barely talks about their work, their career, and what they do. My focus is now on a combination of art and golf. And now I've shifted to the point where many of my photos are photos of my kids or photos of me spending time with my family. Neither of these options are good or bad in and of themselves, but they are a change in the expectations that people have of you. If I've been following this account because it's all MMA, corporate, and career, and now suddenly it's family and art and golf, that's confusing for me. That, for me, as a person who's engaged with this thing, is not what I bought into. Which is why, on a social media level, when you have a person or brand that fundamentally shifts the way in which they interact with the channel, they'll see a big drop or not a big drop, but they'll see a drop in following as they fail to meet the expectations of the audience that they've built around them. So clarity, when it comes down to reestablishing yourself or reimagining your brand or redeveloping that set of expected behaviors and expertise, is all about being very clear within yourself and then within your communications about how you're going to express this change. Because it's all about drawing a clear line between you as an individual and the set of qualities, characteristics, or even activities, in the case of, say, sport or hobbies, for example, that you feel connected to. I'm using sport because that's one that has fundamentally shifted within me a number of times in terms of my focus. And on a personal level, I've seen the drop in quote unquote followership that goes along with it. So in terms of how you establish clarity, there are 3 major steps. I would suggest starting with 3 or 4 focuses, be they activities, interests, passions, and start building or rebuilding your brand around those areas of focus. Now, a big piece of this, because branding is communication, branding is connection, is about expressing these focuses and expressing them across your channels. Because as it stands, our channels, our social media channels, are still kind of the biggest place to reach the greatest number of people. It's not always the most effective place, but it's a good place to start. And then you want to take those things, those same attributes, the same focuses, and begin communicating them within the people around you on a one-to-one level. And you need to on step 3, you need to reinforce your focuses by connecting your engagements, the thing that you do, back to them on a regular basis. If this is something, or one of your focuses is something that you are now intentionally expressing a great affinity for and knowledge about, or at least a process of learning about this thing, then that's something that you need to reinforce over time by connecting yourself back to it on a regular basis. If I have suddenly found myself having a great interest in, international wines, for example, that is something that I need to reinforce over and over and over again, so that I can shift from a state of confusion within the people around me at this sudden or perceived as sudden new interest to something that is an active part of your personality and how you're perceived. If I've gone from the corporate sector to the charitable sector, then speaking about the charitable sector and reinforcing my connection with the charitable sector over and over and over again is part of that role of rebranding and redeveloping the set of expected behaviors and expertise that your network, that the people around you have of you. But it's not enough to simply express that now this is a thing that I care about. I'm now in the not-for-profit sector. I now care about this, because we all care about things, and oftentimes that focus can be a little fair weather. So that's where authority comes into play. Actually building up an expectation of knowledge and experience around the areas of focus that you've chosen. This is where trust building comes into play, because it's not enough to simply express yourself as somebody who cares about something and who is, for want of a better word, an expert in that area. You need to reinforce that with actual content. And this is where a lot of the conversation on content will come into play, because authority is what drives belief. People buy into you based upon your capacity to express or to demonstrate specific knowledge or expertise within a field. So if we want to change our brand, change our perception, it's not just about choosing a few areas of focus. It's about choosing those areas of focus and then reinforcing that with content, building authority authentically by demonstrating real expertise and delivering value. And we can do that in a number of ways. So it starts with expressing your expertise or your passion from a place of knowledge. It's not enough to simply express an interest. You can be an interested amateur that's learning more, or you can be an interested expert who knows a lot. And then there's a whole spectrum in between. But if you're building something into your brand, you need to come at it and express it from a position of knowledge. Part of doing that is by giving away knowledge. So whether it's a talk, whether it's a podcast, whether it's making a blog post, whether it's writing an article on LinkedIn or guest articling, which plays a significant role, it's all about expressing your knowledge outwards for nothing. Give away that knowledge for nothing, and then people will come back to you and look for the other knowledge that you have in addition to what you've already expressed. So it builds that connection by delivering value, so people come back to you to seek more value. And then you want to connect yourself to other centers of authority in your area of focus. This is co-branding or cross-branding. Now, this is more than just, taking a selfie with a speaker that you care about at a conference. It's more than that. It's about engaging with people in a field that you want to make part of your brand. It's about collaborating with them, be it on an article, a podcast, or otherwise. It's about learning from them. So even if you're not translating that connection out into something tangible right now, building and forging that connection contributes to your brand, because it allows you to do that aspect that's continuously learning, developing skills, and then allowing you to deliver more value in future. Another avenue for this is, of course, your career. Where a person works and what they work in plays a pretty significant role in how a person's brand is perceived. When a person has a certain brand and then they work, because work plays a massive role in our North American society, where you work, who you work for, the kind of work you do, because it plays such a massive role in our society. If the brand that you're building doesn't match the organization that you're working for, it feels disconnected, that creates cognitive dissonance in the people around you. It starts to wear away at that clarity pillar of personal branding. So authority and building authority is all about building up your content base. How do you express to others that you are knowledgeable or have expertise around the subjects that you want to make a piece of your personal brand? This can be as specific as legacy giving or mid-level management or how to do major donor solicitations, or it can be as broad as digital fundraising and e-philanthropy in general, without speaking to specific aspects. However, we do have to, whether it's a broad attribute that we want to, or quality or center of knowledge that we want to bring into our brand, or a very specific one, we need to be active in building up our authority, writing articles, posting, connecting with people, all of which play a massive role through association or through direct relaying of knowledge in the authority that we're perceived to have on a subject that is part of our center of focus. And then, of course, there is consistency. And this is about doing the thing and then doing the thing over and over and over again. And this is now about reinforcing belief. You've expressed your areas of focus clearly. You've now worked on building up authority, and that's not a one-time thing. That's a thing that you need to do over and over and over again. Now you need to reinforce that belief with consistency by talking about the same subjects over and over and over again until the point and beyond the point where people begin to associate that thing directly with you. There are people out there who make even the art, like the act of networking is a really simple one, who talk about networking consistently over and over and over again so that it actually builds their network at the same time. The talk of networking builds the network. And by continuing to talk about networking, you build your network by having more people connect you to the art of networking. It's a little meta when it comes to that one specifically, but this applies outwards to everything. It's just about finding the right channel and then doing the thing over and over and over again so that people connect you with a certain idea. The folks at Agents of Good are a great example of people who talk about similar subjects over and over and over again in order to connect themselves closely to their core ideas, their core values. This is also, though, about reinforcing belief within yourself. So similar to introversion, extroversion, I'm not going to dig too deep into this because there are psychology and psychiatric experts who know a lot more about the idea of imposter syndrome than I do. I can only speak on this from a place of my own experience as a young professional who first entered the corporate sector and then entered the not-for-profit sector. Being surrounded with many experts of many kinds with decades of experience, and then coming in as somebody with something to say, be it on stage or in a meeting or otherwise, engendered that feeling within me. I won't speak for others. Imposter syndrome is a challenge that many people face, and overcoming it is subjective. For myself, and for people within my network who have had similar experiences, reinforcing an action, reinforcing our authority and building it over and over and over again is a way that we have found successful in terms of getting around this. The challenge with imposter syndrome is that it's a little chicken and egg, in that imposter syndrome many times can actually prevent you or be a barrier to doing all of these things, building clarity, authority, and consistency. It's something that I think everybody needs to find their own way around based upon your lived experience and in your subjective experience with imposter syndrome. For myself, taking the time to do a self-assessment, taking the time to find clarity in terms of the areas of focus that I find most important or valuable to me, building authority on those through learning and then doing the thing consistently over and over and over again has had a significant impact on my professional and personal relationships in a positive sense. And it's important to note that when we're talking about consistency, this comes down to something that is common across every demographic. A lot of the time when we think of brand building or building a brand from scratch, we find it to be the province of the young, the province of people who are new to a career or new to a sector. But that's not actually true. Rebuilding a brand based on a career shift, a personal life shift, or any of a number of things is something that happens to people across every demographic, or something that can be engaged with by people across every demographic. So consistency is key, especially if you're rebuilding your brand, because if you're starting from nothing, then you don't have as much inertia. If you're starting from somebody who already has a decades old established brand, rebranding yourself differently means overcoming inertia first and then beginning to work to build that brand within your network. In terms of how you do that, use your channels. Right now, they're your best means of connecting with the most people most efficiently with the lowest time spent. It's not necessarily the most effective channel, but it's certainly efficient. Take action and then take action again. Continue to reinforce and demonstrate the behaviors, attributes, areas of expertise that you want to find integral to your brand and help build them. And then authentically connect members of your network to your areas of focus. Invite people to participate in something you care about with you. Invite other people to the conversation. This isn't about you educating them or lecturing them. It's about you bringing them into your lived experience. It's about giving them an opportunity to learn more about you in something that is your passion or your area of focus. And then after that, it simply comes down to taking action and then taking action again. Now, in this section, I want to talk a bit about choosing your channels, because content in branding, as in all of marketing, is queen. Everything in marketing, including your personal and professional branding, revolves around content. It's not enough to just take action. To build an area of focus as part of your brand, people need to actually hear about it. And the challenge is that right now, our channels feel pretty endless. We have standard social, we have new social media like TikTok, we have broader media and potential media. So podcasting continues to grow. Live video has become even more popular during the pandemic. There are webinars like this. We have IGTV, which is still of questionable value. And then you have virtual reality, which continues to be up and coming, and I'm certain will play a significant role in the charitable sector or otherwise in future. Then, of course, you have written media, so people writing open source articles over Medium or LinkedIn. You have blog posts, and you have guest articling. And then, of course, we have in-person. So in-person is less accessible now, but there are talks, webinars, panels, and then your everyday interactions. All of these things come together to build your potential content. The question is, how do you actually choose your channels? Because that's the difficult part. If we propose to each individual that they need to be active on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, TikTok, they need to podcast, they need to do IGTV, they need to be on live video regularly, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, that's impossible. It's just not possible. You'd have to dedicate literally every day to doing just this, which is counterproductive, because again, it's about delivering value, not just communicating about value that you could potentially deliver and never actually delivering on that value. So we need to be a bit selective in terms of choosing the right channels to actually build our brand. So that comes down to choosing channels that feel authentic to you, effectively showcase your brand, and that you can maintain. So for example, a Canadian fundraiser would want to leverage Twitter. One of the things that I noticed right away, coming in from a more corporate career to the not-for-profit sector, is that Twitter plays a massive role in how many fundraisers communicate. Instagram, despite the value that it brings to many, is less important. With AFP alone, Instagram isn't really the right place to engage effectively when you're at, for example, Congress. Twitter is the right place to engage, and that's where a lot of the conversations take place. So you'd want to leverage that. LinkedIn is becoming more of a place where many of these conversations take place, especially with more people using LinkedIn's live video or general video functionality. Guest articling through places like Hillborn play a massive role in how you can get your message, your ideas, and your brand out there. But then there's also the aspect of what about the other parts of your brand? What about the other things that make you you? So if you're also a cooking enthusiast, for instance, you might want to leverage Instagram stories or live videos to bring people into your experience, to bring people and connect them to the areas of focus that matter to you. If there's a sport that you like, then maybe Instagram's the right place, right? Just a general Instagram photo of your activities in action, like golf, for instance, is one example of an activity in action that can be done via Instagram, for example. If it's larger content shares that you're interested in, if you're a writer, then a place like Medium, then LinkedIn articles, even Facebook is an avenue where content sharing of long form content is something that is valuable and that people connect with. But at the end of the day, it comes down to a few things. It comes down to authenticity, because whether it's through a screen or in person, people can read it when you're putting on front. They can read it when you're faking it. So we want to be authentic about our passions and about how we communicate them. We want to effectively showcase our brand. So again, depending on what you're into or the sector you're in or the people you're connecting with, then, I mean, that kind of dictates where you show your brand. An easy example of this in the charitable sector is that people working with vulnerable populations can't always show that person. So maybe a highly visual channel like Instagram shouldn't be your primary focus, depending on what you're about. If you're working with children in some capacity and in whatever way you can show those individuals through media, then maybe TikTok is an option because it's fun, it's engaging, it connects you with your beneficiaries, and it showcases the good work that you do, depending on what it is that you do. And then being able to maintain those channels is critical because we want to take action and take action again. One post isn't enough. It's about reinforcing expected behaviors, so we need to be able to continue to maintain that channel over time. As an individual, that comes down to your personal energy and the time that you're willing to dedicate to do this. A lot of social media and authentic social media has become about day in the life experiences. So you need to be willing to commit to the idea that you're going to be regularly demonstrating these pieces of your life and that you can't necessarily go radio silent for a protracted period of time. Organizationally, this becomes a resourcing question. So we need to choose our channels that are authentic, that showcase your brand well, and that you can maintain. But at the same time, social is a bit challenging. And it's something that there's not a lot that we can do about it, but it's important to acknowledge. So on the plus side, social media engagement has increased by 61% during the pandemic. And acknowledging the typo, COVID-19, not COVID-10. But social media engagement has increased by 61% during this pandemic. So that is something that is theoretically a positive. But at the same time, a post's organic reach is only about 5.5% of your follower base. So if you have 100 followers, you're only really reaching generally about 5 of them. And this is focusing on Facebook and Instagram specifically, which means that while it's efficient to blast out information on social media, it's not always the most effective way to get a thing done. And then, of course, there's the anecdotal social shift that has taken place with social media. Constant mind-numbing scrolling and an almost compulsive consumption of negative media have acquired a new term, doom scrolling. With the highlight of racial inequity in the United States and globally, with the COVID-19 pandemic and everything that's led to, with the recent highlighting of tragedies taking place around the world that the natural media or traditional media doesn't seem to be covering, a lot of people, it appears, have begun to trend towards finding the negative content and actively seeking that. And there are, if you read the associated article, there are some proposed impact that has on a person themselves as they're engaging in this. All of that to say that the waters of social media when it comes to personal branding are choppy. There's a lot of activity on it. However, we are not reaching necessarily all of the people that we want to reach. There's a lot of activity on it, but it might not be activity that's directed or even interested in connecting with the content that you're putting out there. Because social media has changed. It's changed since COVID-19, and more recently, and in almost many ways more significantly, it's changed since George Floyd and the highlighting of racial inequity within the United States and around the world. Social media has always balanced being a news outlet, a content distribution network, social sharing, and even a charitable giving platform. However, in light of these recent events, the focus of social has changed. And that led me, in putting together this deck and preparing to have this conversation, to a few questions. Is there an ethical imperative to how we now use our channels, how we now use our social platform? Is that ethical imperative real, or is it perceived, if it exists? Is now the right time to self-promote via social, or is the expectation that we should be using whatever audience we have to reinforce the very real, vital, and important causes that are at the forefront of global discourse right now? If our social engagement is not connected to a cause or the cause, if we choose to post either something that's self-promotion or simply of our own life, will self-promotion or other posts be perceived negatively by our network? And that's subjective, because it comes down to who your network is. Now, the honest answer is that I can't answer any of these questions. These are questions that were top of mind for me. If you ever navigated to my social channel, you'll see that for myself, I continue to post a combination of things that are socially focused in terms of the social challenges that our society is facing, and personal things as well. But that's a personal choice. There's no right answer to these questions, but the fact that these are the questions, or at least some questions, that exist right now, again, lead me to believe that the waters of social media are choppy at the moment. So we need to be careful in terms of how we use those. The question is, what do we do about that? And the truth is that, I mean, for the time being, it's evolving. So there's not a lot to do about the current challenges right now. However, even before we were facing the COVID-19 pandemic, even before George Floyd, social media as a channel was questionable in terms of how effective it was on a personal branding level. Bring it back to that 5.5% reach metric. If we're only reaching 5% of our audience and we're trying to rebuild our brand and how people see us, how valuable is social media really to continuing to build that outwards on a large scale? And so the interesting thing is that in trying to go macro and adjust your brand with the most people possible, you almost have to go micro. So as social media becomes less effective, the one-on-one or one-to-group approach, such as in a talk or webinar, such as we're at now, approach of connecting with people in person has been growing in value. You forge truer connections, deeper connections, more lasting connections, and make more of an impact when people can actually communicate with you as an individual versus something that is seen and then scrolled past through the short period of attention span that we get from people who see our work on social. In-person connection improves trust due to the authenticity of human-to-human connections. And this is something that we were seeing well before kind of 2020 as a whole hit. We were seeing that there was a shift away from trusting a brand because it was a brand, or trusting an influencer, and looking for recommendations from friends, families, and trusted colleagues. In-person connections also improve authority, pardon me, particularly in the context of talks or podcast interviews where you're clearly demonstrating expertise in a certain subject, or in a place where you know a lot about that subject matter. So all of these things play a role. At the same time, on a pure cost level, if you're only reaching 5.5% of your audience and you want to reach people, other people, or more people, or even people outside your network to begin building your brand outwards, the only avenue is paid advertisement. And then that's you bidding against the other individuals who are also willing to pay for the personal brand, bidding against corporates who also want that share of ad space, which can become, I've dabbled in paid advertising for personal branding, and it can become expensive quickly. And the results, as far as my work has gone with it, have been inconclusive at best. So to understand kind of the role that social plays, we need to acknowledge that under current marketing theory, we tend to maximize the quantity of interactions and connections over the quantity of engagements over the quality of those engagements. This will play more of a role when society gets a little bit back to normal, where we can break out of our bubbles and connect with more people. But in person, whether it's one-on-one through a screen, through a webinar, or at a talk, maximizes quality. And when it comes to personal branding, particularly if you're not willing to spend on it, then this is something that is pretty critical. So in a COVID-19 context, in the world that we're in right now, where we have to look at marketing in the context of something that has been significantly impacted on a channel level by the global pandemic, what does standing out mean? What it really comes down to on a branding level is shifting your channel mix. So connecting through conversation. No matter what channel you're on, shouting your brand to a general public audience isn't enough. You need to express it through active engagement. If social is your primary channel, then what you need to be looking for aren't just areas for overall engagement with others in terms of their likes and shares or comments on your post. It's actively engaging backwards to them through comments, through connection, through conversations, having real engagements and real conversations over your channels. You need to be more engaging. Restrictions are lifting, but restrictions have existed for some time. People are looking for different ways to be engaged, and you have an opportunity to do that through your channels and the conversations you're having. And then, of course, it comes back to the thing that is the foundation of all brand building: share value. Value in this context, it's important to note, does not have to be related to the pandemic. This isn't about a theory on fatigue around sharing value and communicating about the pandemic. This is more to do with sharing something that people find valuable. People find entertainment valuable. People find distraction valuable. Find the value that you are looking to deliver through your channels, and then focus on delivering that value. The one additional aspect that I wanted to talk about here was connecting your brand back to the charitable institution you serve. Many of us work in the not-for-profit sector, and many of us feel very connected to our brand. And the piece that has been missing from this conversation so far is the big piece of how to actually and intentionally connect your brand, or the brand that you're looking to build, back to your charitable brand or your not-for-profits brand. Because one of the stumbling blocks that people run into when it comes to branding and personal branding is that they find themselves in a situation where either their charitable organization has become their brand, they are the charity that they work for, because of the significant demands on our time as fundraisers or otherwise, or they've never done the work to actually build out a personal brand, so all that there is their work. And now the concern is, if I start building my own personal brand, will that begin to conflict with my organization's brand? The answer to that question is it can, but if it can, then you either need to rethink your brand or you need to rethink the charitable organization that you're working for. Because branding is based on values, and the charitable organizations we work for are also often based on a values connection. Because your organization plays a role in how you're perceived. Where you work and the importance of work is significant, particularly in a North American context. So your work plays a role in your brand. Likewise, your brand plays a role in your charity's brand. An organization's brand isn't just something that was written on a paper one time or sent in an ad and that's it. It's not just the tagline that's under the organization. It's a product of people, the people the organization serves, and also all of the people who build up that brand. If your brand is expressed in one way publicly, but then every person you interact with from that organization expresses that brand differently through their connections and their interactions, the brand that wins is going to be the one that's expressed through people. So your organization plays a role in your brand plays a role in your organizations, which is where the values connection comes into play. If you and your organization share values, then your brand will reinforce the organization's brand and vice versa. Your brand won't compete with the organization's brand. The values connection is a symbiotic relationship. The two pieces work together in order to successfully help build each other. Many, if not most, fundraisers feel connected to their charity at a brand level. So intentional branding, in the context of intentional branding, we need to seek a charitable organization, seek a workplace that has that value connection. Intentional branding is about incorporating your work into the way that you see yourself and you want others to see you, into your public perception, into your personal brand, which means actively seeking a value connection. And this can be done in a number of ways. The big ones that come to mind are through the culture of your organization, how your organization treats members of itself and the people who surround it, through your organization's work, the actual work and the efficacy of the work that is done with your beneficiaries. And then, of course, through your personal interactions, right? And that's your personal interactions as a representation of your own brand and your organization's brand. One fantastic example of this is legacy giving, where you're talking to a person about one of the most challenging, intimate experiences they'll ever face. And the only way to do that is by connecting with them on a values level. And that applies outwards. I have to credit Kimberly Blees from Blakely for that particular example. But as a fundraiser, when you're speaking to major donors, mid-level, whoever it is you're speaking to, be it through your written pieces, your social media posts, or your personal solicitations and interactions, getting a values connection is crucial to being successful. So when it comes to connecting your brand and your personal brand to your work, it's important to remember that both of these things, in many cases, or maybe even in most, are built on a foundation of values. So the two values, or the values for you and your personal brand and your organization's brand, when they align, allow you to form that symbiotic relationship between your brand and your organization's brand that allow each to build the other. So the question is, of course, where do we go from here? It comes back to those 5 steps that I presented at the beginning. Articulate your goals, self-assess, find areas of improvement, identify the actions that you need to take in order to achieve those areas of improvement, those change actions, and then take action consistently. Whatever stage you're in this process will depend on you, your experience, and where your brand is right now. But assuming that you're starting from zero, either building a brand intentionally for the first time or rebuilding a brand, start by figuring out what your goals are and make those goals personal for your social life and your social connections or your family life, and also make them professional about where you want to go on a career level, because career is also all about connections. And then do that self-assess. Begin that third-party narrative development so that you can see where you are right now and draft the narrative arc for where you actually want to take things in future. Your immediate next steps are to find clarity. Get clear on the areas of focus for your personal brand, and then begin planning to build those clear lines to your external audience. Once you've found those places, start building authority. Look for opportunities to talk and talk again about the things you care about and demonstrate your expertise. What you're doing here, it's not about boasting or showboating or doing a look at me. This is all about demonstrating the value that you can deliver outwards to the people around you and demonstrating it again. And then develop consistently. Take action again, and so in so doing, reinforce belief, not just in your public audience, but also in yourself, reinforcing that belief in your brand. To wrap it up and simply put, start with where you are, find the things you're good at, tally the things that are important to you, and connect them all to discover how you can deliver value to those around you. When you've put all of these pieces together, essentially, you've found your brand. And then after that, it's all about building it. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleagues at AFP Ottawa to facilitate any questions.
Thank you, Mo. That was so helpful. And I was just thinking it's so relevant, I think, to kind of every professional, no matter what sort of stage of your career you're in or what sector you're part of as well. So thank you for that. The presentation will be available online for everyone to kind of turn back to later on. It'll be distributed to all of our kind of social channels. But, you know, really, I personally took a lot from just how do you overcome the trust barrier? How do you kind of build a more authentic personal brand? And how do you do all of that in the current context, which is just bonkers?
Challenging, sure.
Put it very mildly.